The first alarm sounded like a shriek tearing through glass. It began as a test, or so everyone thought, the usual quarterly drill meant to prove compliance, and fill the afternoon with impatience. Then the lights blinked red, and voices rose in a low chorus of uncertainty. Protocol demanded calm, yet calm scattered faster than smoke. Daniel Reed stood beside the loading bay door, clipboard in hand, measuring how fast everything unraveled. People darted for exits they had never practiced reaching. The smell of burnt dust filled the vents as emergency shutters rolled halfway down. Somewhere above, a loudspeaker urged evacuation. Somewhere closer, the sound of knocking heels against concrete joined the rising panic. "Sir, we need to move!" a junior tech yelled, already halfway to the stairwell. Daniel's feet refused, held not by fear of death, but by the severe awareness that drills like these often broke bones, not records. He listened for secondary alarms, the double pulse that meant real fire, but none came. In that gap, his instinct warred with reason, uncertain which rule to obey. If it was only a test, running now would compound chaos. If it wasn't, hesitation could cost lives. The indecision lasted 4 seconds too long. From the corner office mezzanine, Elena Shaw, the CEO's daughter, leaned on the railing, notebook clutched tight. She had visited the plant to shadow her father, curious about industrial safety from a safe distance. She saw the man below, middle-aged, expression unreadable, as others streamed past him. To her, from that vantage, stillness looked like cowardice. Someone's phone camera caught him, the supervisor frozen, eyes uncertain, hand hovering near the alarm override. The building was evacuated within minutes. The fire turned out to be steam from an overheated compressor. When the all-clear sounded, Daniel was the last to leave, checking that the conveyor belts were powered down. By the time he reached the parking lot, whispers had already hatched wings. He just stood there. Didn't even blink. The CEO's kid saw it. Upstairs, Elena replayed the recorded clip, uneasy but convinced she'd witnessed failure. Her father, Charles Shaw, saw it differently, opportunity. "We can't have hesitant supervisors," he said. "Safety depends on decisiveness." By sunset, the internal memo circulated. Thorndon Industries intends to review emergency response leadership following the drill incident. Names weren't needed, everyone knew. At a corner cafe near the station, Daniel sat alone, steam from his untouched coffee fogging the window. Messages from coworkers arrived one after another, curious, pitying, distant. He typed replies but never pressed send. Outside, sirens pulsed faintly, another city emergency, unrelated yet sounding like judgment. He rubbed his palms together, not to warm them but to feel something move. In those same still hands, callous from years of quiet repair, he felt the weight of misunderstanding settle deeper than anger ever could. By nightfall, the clip had spread across feeds. Supervisor freezes during drill. The caption beneath read the verdict before anyone could defend him. By Monday morning, the decision arrived folded inside language polite enough to sting twice. Suspension pending review. No signature, just a stamped line from Human Resources and a sterile assurance that the company valued his years of service. Daniel read the line 3 times before closing the envelope. His son's cereal spoon clinked against a bowl in the kitchen. The sound was ordinary enough to keep his expression steady. He walked out with a smile that belonged to habit, not to belief. Meeting went fine, he told Noah, buttoning the same navy jacket he'd worn since promotions were still possible dreams. "They're just adjusting some schedules." Noah grinned, trusting, thin arms straightening his backpack straps. "You'll still make the game." "Wouldn't miss it." He dropped his son off at school and lingered an extra minute watching him disappear into the crowd of uniforms and innocent noise. The parking lot wind smelled faintly of chalk and diesel, 2 cents that in Daniel's mind meant duty and life continuing without him. At home, the apartment hummed with constraint. The refrigerator rattled, the blinds whined when wind found its way through their edges. On the small dining table sat a jar half filled with coins labeled Car Fund, Noah's first. He wondered how long the jar would survive before utility bills demanded a ransom. Yet despite the calculation threading through his head, he reached for a volunteer form from the school newsletter. It felt better to sign his name under Field Day Helpers than to admit the hours he was trying to bury. That afternoon, the headlines grew teeth. Supervisor freezes during drill, safety or fear? The accompanying photo, the brief frame of him paused beneath red lights, appeared everywhere. Beneath each repost, comments multiplied, dissecting courage from ignorance, turning seconds of hesitation into moral sentences. Daniel didn't scroll. He fixed a loose cupboard hinge instead, then swept the hallway, then stood in the quiet that followed with nothing left to fix. Across the city's skyline, in a glass-walled office far above the noise, Charles Shaw leaned back as news editors replayed the clip on public channels. His daughter sat across the desk, guilt nestled beneath her composure. "You see," he said, tone level, instructional. "Panic comes from those unprepared to lead. Composure wins trust." Elena stared at the footage muted on his screen, the man standing motionless while others fled. "He might have been thinking," she said softly. Charles adjusted his cufflinks, the small sound final. "Think too long, and people die. That's the rule." His certainty filled every corner like varnish, smooth, reflective, impermeable. That evening, Daniel and Noah ate scrambled eggs on buttery toast. The apartment smelled almost hopeful. Noah talked about his upcoming science project, how he wanted to test the heat resistance of balloons. "We'll need candles," he said. "Maybe matches." Daniel paused, smiled faintly. "One thing at a time." When Noah slept, Daniel returned to his laptop, cursor hovering over job listings. Janitorial posts, part-time maintenance roles, overnight monitoring, each one asked for reliability, none for redemption. The hum of the old fan pushed warm air across his face. Outside, buses muttered along their routes, streetlights flickered like measured forgiveness. He rubbed his eyes, whispered to no one. "They think fear stops you." Then he glanced toward the closed door of his son's room, the glow of a small night light within. "But it's what you face when no one's watching that counts." The stillness answered him, kind for once. Yet somewhere beyond the walls, the word coward continued traveling from screen to screen, louder and cleaner than truth could ever afford to be. Weeks folded themselves into sameness, days that began before light and ended long after it. Daniel's name no longer appeared on Thornton's staff rosters, yet his hands still knew the rhythm of its machines. Through a subcontractor's quiet arrangement, he picked up overnight maintenance shifts, patching pipes, checking alarms, changing filters no one else wanted to bother with. Officially he was nobody, a line item on an outsourced ledger. Unofficially, he was still the man who had once frozen when the lights turned red. He arrived through side entrances, exchanged nods with security guards who half recognized him but never asked. His new badge bore the word maintenance in cheap plastic. It swung against a second-hand jacket that smelled faintly of oil and metal polish. The work was humble, the silence easier. At the edges of his shifts, he sometimes crossed paths with his old janitor friend, Miguel, whose good humor had survived every layoff. One night Miguel found him rewiring a sensor near the service elevator, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. "You know," Miguel said, leaning on a mop, "I watched that drill video again. The brave ones, they were shouting over each other while you stayed put." Daniel tightened a wire cap and didn't look up. "Because shouting doesn't save anyone." Miguel smiled slowly, eyes creasing. "Still, no one listens until something burns. Then I'll be here when they do." The quiet between them carried respect beyond words. Miguel tapped his mop once on the floor and went back to work. Daniel wiped his hands and took a sip from a water bottle. The night air drifted cool through the half-open dock doors. The building, when emptied of employees, sounded alive with low breaths, machines pulsing under dim lights, computers blinking in sleep mode like a city of small mechanical hearts. He liked it that way. Alone, the place didn't judge. Sometimes, when he finished around early, he checked the emergency systems that engineers had stopped trusting years ago. A private ritual. He wasn't chasing redemption, only maintenance. The principle that if things could be kept working, maybe so could he. That was when he first saw Elena Shaw again. She appeared one Thursday evening, dressed plainly in a cardigan rather than the crisp designer suits she wore during company hours. The storm outside had delayed her father's driver, so she'd used the quiet time to collect research documents from the development archive. She didn't look up immediately as the elevator doors opened to the maintenance floor. When she did, she startled slightly at the sight of the man co-wiring an open panel near the stairwell. "Sorry," she said, polite reflex. "I was told this level was clear." "It usually is," Daniel said. His voice had changed in her memory, steadier, deeper. She stepped forward hesitantly. "Do I know you from somewhere?" He met her gaze briefly, slow recognition passing without incident. "Maybe," he said. "There's a lot of people in this building over the years." "You were at the drill, weren't you?" she asked before she could stop herself. He tightened the last screw, disconnected the tester, and straightened. "Everybody was." Her cheeks colored. "Right. Of course. I didn't mean. It's fine." He forced a small smile, the kind that let her leave without guilt. Elena turned the folder in her hands. "I'm compiling safety analysis reports for my father's project. There's missing documentation. Legacy systems, mostly." Daniel dusted his hands on a rag, nodding at the open ducts above. "Legacy systems always get blamed when something goes wrong. They're built quiet. That's why people forget they're still holding things together." She didn't know how to answer that, so she said, "Thank you. I'll let you get back to your work." When the elevator doors closed behind her, the mirrored steel caught both their reflections for an instant, hers framed by polished light, his swallowed by shadow. Neither looked fully right without the other in focus. That night, as she reviewed old reports, one line in a margin caught her attention: Supervisor D. Reed implemented manual override protocol, 2019. She frowned, pen hovering, a slow disquiet blooming. And down in the silent corridors, Daniel continued his rounds, unaware that recognition had already begun, small as a pilot light waiting for oxygen. The storm arrived without manners, lightning slashing the horizon, thunder shaking the glass. By twilight, Thornton's towers blurred behind rain like a ship dissolving at sea. Most employees had gone home early, but a skeleton crew remained to finalize audit corrections. Upstairs, Elena Shaw moved between glass partitions, compiling files the auditors needed by morning. Her reflection followed her in every pane, professional, composed, slightly anxious. The wind pressed a palm against the windows, begging entry. Below, Daniel guided his cart through the lower service corridors, pushing the odor of citrus cleaner and steel into the hum of machines. Maintenance shifts during storms made him uneasy. Old wiring sulked when dampness crept near its insulation. Still, his hands moved by habit: check circuit box, secure latches, note flickers. His portable radio hissed an anxious static in rhythm with the building's electric pulse. At 8:47, the first fault flared deep in the storage wing. It began as a crackle inside an overburdened panel that nobody had inspected since the merger. The circuit arced once, white light against darkness, kissing a cluster of cardboard and solvent drums stacked too close to regulations. By the time the smoke reached the ceiling, the storm outside drowned the smell of what had begun. Elena glanced up from her monitor when the room flickered. "Power dip?" she murmured. The team lead nearby shrugged. "Happens every thunderstorm." They returned to their screens, unaware that heat was rising 2 wings away, exhaling behind sealed doors. Downstairs, Daniel felt it first, an unfamiliar warmth breathing through the floor vents. He paused, frowned, sniffed the air. Faint smoke, metallic, live, wrong. He pressed his radio. "Control, this is sublevel maintenance. I'm reading combustion trace near section 4B. Confirm." Only static answered. He tried again, sharper. "Control, respond. You've got possible ignition in the storage zone." Still nothing. The silence in his earpiece crawled beneath his skin. He checked his watch. Emergency dispatcher rotations ended at 8:30. After that, only alarms alerted command. He waited. No siren. No light. Something guttered inside the circuits. The warning system had drowned itself in its own failure. Daniel dropped the mop handle, grabbed the spare extinguisher from his cart, and started toward 4B. Each hallway was longer than memory, lit by emergency strips now fading to amber. Rain disguised the echoes of his boots, but not the growing heartbeat of machinery straining under stress. At the intersection he found smoke coning from the ventilation grill, a lazy plume, deceptively graceful. He coughed, covered his mouth with his sleeve, and keyed into the secured service access. The door refused his code. Backup locks had defaulted due to the outage. He looked around, no one in sight. Upstairs, unaware lives clicked mouses and zipped folders. He slammed the butt of the extinguisher against the door lock until the panel cracked, sparks briefly illuminating his face. The door yielded with a wounded sigh, revealing fire crawling the shelves like orange handwriting. He stepped back into the corridor, radio in hand again, shouting, "Fire in Section 4B, spread imminent! Trigger suppression!" But his voice fed into dead air. The sprinklers coughed once and died. Up above, the first whiff of smoke breached the executive corridor where Elena worked. Someone screamed that it smelled like rubber. Power blinked out again, leaving monitors yawning black. "Evacuate!" a manager yelled, but half the staff froze, instinctively checking if this too was a test. "Not this time!" Elena shouted, grabbing the nearest colleague's arm. Flames blossomed at the end of the hall's glass spine, blotting reflections into jagged halves. She could taste acrid heat curling through the filter. Meanwhile, Daniel sprinted toward the freight elevator, overriding the manual controls. The cab rose slow as gilt. He smashed the intercom. "Anyone on 4? Fire in storage! Get out now!" Only interference. He imagined the upper floors, lights failing, people trusting alarms that would never sound. Wind rocked the building, thunder rolled like a second heartbeat beneath his own. He thought of his son, of how Noah slept through every storm because he trusted his father to be awake for them both. Daniel adjusted his jacket over his leather gloves, tightened the strap of his extinguisher, and whispered a private line into the static. "I'm going up." The elevator door slid open, welcoming him to smoke already rewriting the air above. The fourth floor was unrecognizable, heat bending the corridor's shape, shadows rippling like water. Sirens wailed only in fragments, choking on their own machinery. Smoke boiled upward, turning the air from breathable into memory. Daniel Reed arrived at the stairwell door dripping rain and sweat, extinguisher slung across his shoulder, a soaked rag clutched tight against his mouth. When the latch refused to turn, he kicked once, twice, until the frame groaned open and a wash of ash-filled heat punched through. For a moment he stopped, a mechanic's instinct trying to read the fire like circuitry. Oxygen fed it through vents, dragging the blaze toward the executive corridor where polished glass disguised cheap insulation. Each breath scraped his lungs raw, yet his pulse steadied, finding a rhythm older than fear. "Facility operations, if anyone's on 4, call out!" he shouted, voice lost in the roar. Only crackling answered. He pulled the rag higher, ducked low, and pressed forward, one hand following the wall like braille. Flames ate patterns into the carpet. Ceiling panels collapsed, raining sparks that hissed against his boots. His flashlight jittered shadows across doors he once opened as an employee but now trespassed as a ghost. By the long window, the night gleamed wet and distorted. Figures gathered far below near the main gate, security, paramedics, and executives craning upward. Their radios crackled questions without answers. Daniel caught a glimpse of them between tongues of flame, men in suits pointing, women screaming into phones. None dared enter. Risk management had banned heroics. Somewhere ahead came a hoarse coughing, female, young. "Help!" He pushed toward the voice, knees brushing debris, lungs tightening with every step. The glow sharpened, revealing Elena's shawl, half hidden beneath fallen ceiling beams and clumps of cables. Her blouse was gray with soot, one sleeve torn. She saw him through the blur. "You," she managed. "You can't. You need to stay down," he said, dropping beside her. "The exit. On fire." We'll take maintenance. He levered a beam enough for her to crawl free. She struggled up, wavering, and he guided her by the shoulder. His calm unnerved her. Even as smoke clawed their throats, his hands never shook. Keep below the smoke, he told her. If you see light, don't run toward it. Follow the flow of air. But that. Just trust me. They moved, crawling through heat that devoured direction. Daniel used his jacket sleeve to test each door. Heat meant death, cool meant chance. The trick belonged to men who fixed things quietly, not to those who issued commands. He knew the shortcuts, a maintenance duct leading to an old access stair sealed years ago, but never removed from memory. They reached an intersection where flame pulsed across the ceiling like anger given shape. Elena hesitated. The fire seemed alive, rising with each gust of storm wind through shattered vents. Her knees trembled. He caught her wrist. Look at me! Her eyes met his, wild reflection of orange and fear. I froze once, he said hoarsely. Not again. Move when I tell you. He led, shoulders square against the inferno. She followed, counting his steps, trusting the sound of his boots more than her sight. The extinguisher spat pale clouds that bought seconds of breath. Through vaulting darkness he found the metal hatch leading into the ductwork corridor. The handle was warped but not fused. He slammed it with a wrench he'd carried on instinct. It gave. Cooler air slapped them as he shoved her inside first. Go! He barked, crawling behind while collapse thundered behind them. They emerged into a stairwell thick with gray smoke but intact. Downward, blue light shimmered from emergency signs. She stumbled, coughing hard. Her body wanted to rest, but the fire chased oxygen like debt. Halfway down she fainted. Daniel caught her under the arms, adjusted her weight against his shoulder, and carried her without speaking. The stairwell door at ground level burst open into chaos. Flames radiated beyond the glass walls, splintering colors against the midnight rain. People screamed directions, none helpful. Cameras rolled because someone always documented disaster. Security guards shouted, "There's someone inside!" Then through the shimmering heat, a figure appeared, his silhouette against the furnace, carrying another. The crowd hushed as if a hand had pressed every mouth closed. Step by step he crossed the threshold, black smoke unfurling behind him like a cloak torn from shadow. Paramedics rushed forward, taking Elena from his arms. For a moment Daniel swayed, darkness crowding the edges of his vision. Someone shouted, "Get him oxygen!" He waved them off and staggered away from the flames, chest heaving. Rain poured harder, hissing against the building's skin, masking sobs, muting questions. The CO, Charles Shaw, shoved through the barrier of onlookers. His eyes found his daughter's soot-streaked face. Then they found the man who had carried her out, the one he'd suspended, condemned quietly, forgotten easily. Daniel met his stare briefly. No triumph, no apology, only exhaustion. "Backups are automatic now," he muttered, half to himself, half to the machines that had betrayed them. Then he turned toward the paramedic lights, toward silence. Behind him, no one dared speak. Even applause felt improper, like noise against the echo of conscience. The rain washed ash into the gutters, carrying with it rumor, judgment, and the last proof of who had stood still and who had truly moved. The hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic and relief. Sunlight seeped through half-closed blinds onto linen sheets that rustled when Elena stirred. Her eyelids lifted slowly, the ceiling dissolving from blur into white geometry. For a long moment she didn't know whether the building still burned or if the fire had existed only inside her lungs. Then the crisp angle of enforced stand anchored her to the present. The worst was over. Her voice emerged dry as ash. "Dad?" A nurse smiled. "He's on his way. Rest, Miss Shaw." 2 doors down, Daniel Reed sat upright in a separate room, forearms bandaged from wrist to elbow. His burns were minor, like the contents of a life he refused to dramatize. The television on the wall muttered headlines about "Single father hero saves CEO's daughter." Every anchor tried to translate humility into marketable courage, but none could replicate his quiet refusal to be mythical. When the journalist appeared at his door with a camera crew, he simply said, "No interviews," and turned the volume down until the screen became a pantomime of praise. Down the hall, Charles Shaw arrived, tie imperfect, pride exhausted. The executive who once lectured about composure now moved with the hesitancy of a man asking permission to enter his own story. When he saw his daughter awake, the stern outline of his face softened like paper under rain. "Elena," he said, sitting at her bedside, trying to disguise the tremor in his hand. "They said the smoke damage was mild. You're all right?" She nodded weakly. "Because of him." Charles looked at his knees. "I know." She reached for the water cup, sipped, then fixed him with eyes sharper than fatigue should allow. "You called him a liability, remember? You said people like him slowed progress." He closed his eyes. "And he saved you. And you'll apologize properly?" she asked. "Yes," he said after too long. "Before everyone." 4 days later, in the executive boardroom, cameras recorded a different kind of meeting. The long table gleamed under soft light. Department heads lined each side, waiting for explanations disguised as gratitude. Charles stood at the head of the table and began without preface. "Before we discuss recovery operations," he said, "there is an acknowledgement this company owes." His voice carried not command but the hum of someone relearning honesty. Daniel Reed prevented a catastrophe larger than the fire itself. His forethought in redesigning the manual override procedures, and his actions that night, protected lives. "Including my daughter's." Murmurs spread. The same colleagues who had once whispered coward avoided his gaze now. Charles turned toward the doorway. Daniel stepped in, uncomfortable amid the tailored suits. The bandages on his arms peeked from his sleeves. His calm filled the space heavier than applause. "My reinstatement letter's appreciated," he said quietly, "but I'll decline the management promotion." A ripple of confusion. Charles frowned. "Decline? I'll lead the new safety programs." "That's enough." He lifted his gaze around the room. "Courage isn't rank, Mr. Shaw. It's remembering what you're responsible for when everyone else forgets." Silence answered him, consensual, humbled silence. Finally, Charles nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than authority. "Then you'll have what you need," he said. Daniel thanked him, his tone plain, final. Outside the boardroom, the hallway windows showed cranes restoring the burned section of the facility. Workers moved with disciplined patience, their shapes small against scaffolding like pieces returning to order. In that reflection of labor, Daniel saw his son's drawing face-taped inside his wallet, a stick figure standing beside a building with blue smoke curling upward. Beneath, Noah's handwriting read, "Dad making things safe again." He tucked it back, as if caution could protect even paper from fire. The world would remember headlines, awards, applause. He remembered heat, breath, and a voice in smoke saying, "Trust me." For Daniel, that was enough of forever. The memorial was smaller than anyone expected, a modest metal plaque fixed to the concrete wall near the renovated stairwell. It bore no marble columns, no speeches, only a few fresh lilies at its base. The inscription read, "In gratitude to those who acted when silence mattered most." Below, in smaller letters, "Dedicated by Thorndon Industries, 2024. Daniel stood beside his 12-year-old son, the morning air still damp from the previous night's rain. Noah juggled his baseball glove under one arm, whispering, "That's your handwriting, isn't it?" Daniel smiled faintly. "They used my revision notes. Guess it stuck." No photographers waited, no crowd applauded. A few employees bowed their heads, their reflections merging with the faint gleam of new safety railings. For Daniel, that anonymity was its own peace, work done, remembered quietly, like any repair worth its effort. He traced the plaque's cool surface once with his fingers, the way he'd inspect new wiring. "Looks solid," he murmured, and Noah grinned, echoing every inspection they'd ever shared. Across the city, on a high floor of glass and morning sun, Elena Shaw drafted a note she read twice before sending. It carried no subject line, just the sentence she had thought about for weeks. Most people burn for attention. You walked through fire so others could breathe. When Daniel opened the message later that day, he read it once, smiled, and closed the phone without replying. Words, after all, were lighter than actions, and he'd already spoken everything necessary with the way he'd carried her from the smoke. That evening he and Noah walked home through the park, the last streaks of sunset carving copper lines across the path. The wind smelled of wet stone and something new, faintly electrical, as if the world were freshly wired for continuation. The memorial behind them caught a final glint of sunlight before shadow reclaimed it. And somewhere between the burn of memory and the ease of ordinary breathing, the story settled into its final truth. In a world loud about bravery, it was the quiet man who kept everyone alive.